I remember walking into the house that evening and instantly feeling that familiar mix of comfort and mild anticipation. It was one of those family gatherings where everything smells like tradition, the faint aroma of butter sizzling in pans, the sweetness of desserts cooling on the counter, and that lingering scent of polished wood from the living room furniture. You know the one, that subtle perfume of home you only notice when you step in after a long day. I smiled, catching glimpses of cousins I hadn't seen in months, some greeting me with warm hugs, others with those casual nods that somehow carry their own little judgments. I liked being the one who was level-headed in the family, the one people turned to when things got messy, when arguments flared over something trivial, or when decisions needed to be made calmly. Not that anyone had ever said it out loud, but I could feel it in the way my aunt paused for my opinion, or the way my uncle's eyes lingered just a second longer when the conversation got tense. And honestly, I liked it. There's a subtle pride in knowing you're counted on, even if it's small, even if it doesn't come with fanfare. That I shuffled my feet slightly, fingers brushing over the polished surface of the table as I passed, just enough to feel grounded. Laughter echoed from the kitchen, soft chatter bouncing off the walls, and somewhere behind me, I could hear the faint clink of glasses meeting in a toast. It all felt normal, comfortable, safe. I took a mental note of the food spread, platters of colorful salads, warm bread, and the kind of rich, fragrant dishes that only appear at family gatherings. My stomach growled lightly, and I smiled at the thought of seconds later. I let my eyes wander over the room, noting the way my younger cousins were trying to sneak some dessert, how my aunt was fussing over the tablecloth one last time, and how my cousin, was leaning against the wall with that easy grin, joking with anyone who'd listened. I told myself quietly, I've seen how things unfold. I'll handle this. I'll keep my cool. There was a calm confidence in that thought, like I'd done this before, like I could navigate whatever minor chaos might pop up. Of course, I didn't know then that tonight would unfold into something I'd never forget. But in that moment, the room felt steady, the air warm, the hum of voices comforting. I was just another part of the scenery, blending in, laughing along, sipping my drink, and enjoying the rhythm of familiarity. And maybe, just maybe, I felt a little too secured at first. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. My cousin, leaning casually against the doorway with that half-smirk he always wore, made a comment, light and joking on the surface, but with a sharp edge underneath. It wasn't directed at anyone else, not really. It was aimed at me. I caught it out of the corner of my eye, the way his eyes lingered just a little too long, the way his grin didn't quite reach them. I froze for a second, thinking, maybe I'm overreacting. He's just joking. But there was that tiny twitch in his smile, the almost invisible lift of his eyebrow, that told a story I didn't want to hear. The kind of story that whispers, watch your back. I tried to shake it off. I laughed lightly at a cousin's silly anecdote and nodded along, trying to focus on the chatter around me, the clinking of cutlery, the soft hum of conversation, the laughter bouncing off the walls. But my chest felt a little tighter now, like someone had subtly nudged the air out of my lungs. My hands brushed against the edge of the table, tapping fingers nervously, and I noticed how my mind kept drifting back to him, wondering what exactly he meant. Then came another comment, slightly louder this time. A jab about something minor I had done months ago, something I had long forgotten, but framed in a way that made everyone else chuckle just a little too easily. My stomach sank, and I felt that cold, prickling sensation at the back of my neck. I could see my relatives exchanging glances, the corners of mouths twitching, some trying to hide smiles, others frozen mid-chew. I remember thinking, why does it feel like a spotlight just hit me? Like I was suddenly under scrutiny, standing in a room full of familiar faces who, for the first time tonight, seemed just a little more distant. My cousin's laugh rang louder than usual, a little too forced, a little too knowing, and I realized my heart had started racing. I took a slow breath, trying to center myself, reminding myself, it's nothing. He's joking. Just ignore it. But even as I repeated that, I couldn't help noticing the subtle shift in the room. The way conversations paused for a split second when he spoke, how eyes darted toward me and then away, like something delicate had been cracked. I felt a knot tightening in my chest, part confusion, part unease. That calm, familiar rhythm I had felt when walking in had begun to wobble. And in the pit of my stomach, I sensed it. Tonight might not be as simple as I thought. And then it happened. Like a punch I didn't see coming, my cousin's words cut through the room, loud and deliberate, right in front of everyone. I froze mid-laugh at some distant joke, and suddenly, all eyes, or at least it felt that way, were on me. He brought up that old mistake I'd made months ago, twisting it just enough for the story to sound ridiculous, almost farcical. Everyone laughed. Everyone except me. I remember the sting immediately, my chest tightening, my stomach flipping. There was this surreal moment where my brain tried to process what I'd just heard. Did he really just say that? In front of everyone? The words echoed in my mind, each repetition heavier than the last. I wanted to shrink, to disappear, to somehow erase the memory of walking into this room 5 minutes ago feeling calm, feeling safe. The sound of laughter felt almost cruel, ringing louder in my ears, bouncing off walls that suddenly seemed too close. I could hear the faint scrape of a chair as someone shifted nervously, a cousin clearing their throat as if trying to rescue the room from awkwardness. But it was too late. The moment had been set, the spotlight on me. I looked around, searching for someone to shield me, to throw me a lifeline. But all I found were faces I recognized, smiling, some amused, some shocked, and a few whose eyes betrayed that they were silently judging. I felt my hands clench into fists at my sides, nails digging into my palms as my mind raced. Why? Why would he do this? The smell of the room, once comforting, the rich aroma of spices, the faint sweetness from desserts, suddenly seemed suffocating, mingling with the bitter taste rising in my throat. I wanted to say something, to defend myself, but the words caught in my throat like they had been swallowed by the laughter echoing around me. And then I noticed it, a subtle smirk creeping across my cousin's face, satisfied, as if he had just executed some plan I wasn't aware of. My heart pounded harder. I felt like a character in a play I hadn't auditioned for, forced onto the stage while everyone else watched the performance with rapt attention. Time seemed to stretch. I could see the small details, the glint of cutlery on the table, the way the light caught the folds in the tablecloth, the slight sway of the chandelier above casting shadows on the floor. Every ordinary detail felt magnified, every laugh and glance intensified, as though the universe had slowed just to let me feel every ounce of embarrassment in slow motion that I tried to remind myself. Don't react. Keep your composure. But my throat burned, my vision blurred slightly with the sting of sudden tears I refused to let fall. I wanted to disappear, to retreat somewhere safe, but I was frozen, a spectator in my own humiliation. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't before. This wasn't just a joke. It was intentional, carefully crafted, and I had just walked right into it. And then she froze. My cousin's fiancée, standing there just a few feet away, mid-laugh, mid-motion, suddenly still. Her hand hung in the air, like she'd been caught in the middle of a gesture she couldn't complete. Her eyes widened slightly, not with amusement, not with the casual laughter of the others, but with something heavier, something that made the air in the room feel suddenly colder, sharper. I remember thinking, wait, why isn't she laughing? Why is she staring at me like that? That brief pause lasted just a few seconds, but it stretched like minutes. It was the kind of silence that makes every tiny sound in a room feel deafening. The soft scrape of a chair, the faint tick of a clock. Even the distant hum of the refrigerator seemed to punch through the tension. Everyone else seemed momentarily caught in her stillness. Laughter faltered. Some faces turned toward her, others toward me, searching for the invisible cue that would tell them how to react. And in that suspended heartbeat, I felt my stomach twist into knots. The humiliation from my cousin's words was still raw, burning like acid, but now it was tinged with this new, unnameable anxiety that I tried to read her expression, desperate for a clue, but it was a mask of shock, of hesitation. She wasn't judging me, not in the way I expected, but something else flickered there, a recognition, a quiet warning that unsettled me more than any mocking words could. My heart started to pound, the echo of it almost louder than the stillness around us. I could feel my own thoughts racing. Did she realize something I don't? Is she about to say something that changes everything? I glanced at my cousin, whose grin faltered just a fraction, and for the first time, I saw a shadow of unease cross his smug face. It wasn't a big change, just a twitch of an eyebrow, a slight tension in his jaw, but it was enough to make my stomach tighten further. The smell in the room seemed sharper now, more pungent. The scent of food and perfume mingled oddly with tension, like the air itself was waiting for her to speak. And then I noticed how my own hands were trembling slightly, not with anger, but with anticipation, the kind that makes every second stretch. Unbearably long. In that strange, frozen moment, I realized that the balance of the room had shifted. The attention was no longer solely on my humiliation. It was on something bigger, something about to be revealed, and I had no idea how it would land. My mind swirled with questions I couldn't answer yet, and for the first time since the mocking began, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't over yet. And then she said it. The words cut through the tension like a knife. You were the judge. For a moment, I didn't understand. My brain froze, scrambling to connect the dots. The room seemed to shrink, the hum of conversation and laughter vanishing into nothing. The words repeated in my mind, over and over, as though I were hearing them in slow motion. Me, the judge, and then it hit. The memory came rushing back, unbidden. A past event, months ago, where I had been entrusted with a decision, a vote, something simple but official in the family, a role I had taken seriously without realizing how much it might matter later. And now my cousin had twisted it, weaponized it, using my own authority against me in front of everyone. I felt the heat rise in my chest, a mix of shock, anger, and a strange sort of vindication. So that's why she froze. She knows. She sees it too. My mind raced through all the moments leading up to this. The jokes, the smirks, the subtle digs. They weren't random. They weren't careless. They were intentional, calculated, and I had walked straight into it. The sound of the room came back slowly, but it was different now. The laughter had died down to uncomfortable murmurs, whispers like shadows stretching across the floor. I could hear my own heartbeat, pounding hard in my ears, each thump reminding me of my vulnerability in that moment. I could taste the bitter sting in my mouth, the dry scrape of panic that made my throat tighten. I looked at my cousin, who had been grinning moments ago, expecting his little performance to land perfectly. But now, under the weight of her words, his expression faltered. Just a fraction, a slight crease in his forehead, a fleeting tension in his jaw, but enough to tell me that the game had shifted. My eyes darted back to her, to the fiancée, frozen, but resolute, like she had seen the truth before anyone else could react. There was a quiet authority in the way she said it, a clarity that demanded attention, that made everyone in the room stop and take a breath. And in that pause, I realized something. She was on my side, even if no one else seemed to be. The sting of betrayal was still sharp, but it was mixed now with a strange clarity. I wasn't just being mocked for no reason. He thought he could manipulate the story, but the truth is out. My mind raced with indignation, shame, and a flicker of empowerment all at once. That I wanted to say something, to defend myself, to reclaim the dignity that had been stripped in moments, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I let the silence stretch just long enough to let the weight of the revelation sink in, for him, for the room, for myself. Every detail around me seemed sharper now, the faces of my family frozen in reaction, the gleam of the chandelier above, the soft clinking of utensils as people subtly shifted in their seats. Every visual cue underscored the truth, making the room feel almost cinematic, as if life had slowed down just to let this moment land. And in that frozen, surreal moment, I realized one undeniable truth. He had underestimated me. And now the story was no longer his to control. After her words sank in, the room seemed to blur around me. I could still hear murmurs, soft gasps, and the faint shuffle of chairs, but my mind had slipped somewhere else, back in time, to that day months ago when I had been the judge. I remembered sitting at the long dining table, papers spread in front of me, the air thick with anticipation. Everyone had leaned in, waiting for my decision. I had taken it seriously, as I always did, trying to weigh fairness against familiarity, logic against emotion. I thought I was doing the right thing, that my judgment would be respected, that it would resolve whatever little family drama was brewing. And at the time, it felt just routine. Important, yes, but unremarkable in the grand tapestry of family life. But now, standing here, that memory felt heavy, almost suffocating. I replayed the moment of handing down my decision, the weight of my words, the finality I'd felt. My cousin's face flashed before me, nodding politely, but with that glimmer of something I hadn't noticed, something calculating. I didn't see it then. How could I have been so blind? I thought about the small, subtle signs I had ignored. Back then, the smirk, the sidelong glance, the way he'd asked questions that seemed harmless but now felt like probes, scouting weaknesses. I had trusted him, assumed goodwill, and in hindsight, it felt almost naive. My chest tightened with regret, a hollow ache that settled deep. I should have seen it coming. I should have anticipated this. The flashback flickered again. This time, the voices of family members cheering my decision, nodding approval, praising my fairness. I had felt proud, maybe even a little too proud, and somewhere in that pride, I had left myself exposed. And my cousin, he had seen it. Every subtle lift of my chin, every confident tone in my voice, every tiny sign that I believed in my own integrity. He had cataloged it, stored it, and now, months later, he was using it against me. The bitter taste of betrayal mixed with regret, like a storm of emotions churning in my chest. I could feel my throat tighten, my hands trembling slightly, as if the memory itself had physical weight. I wanted to reach back in time, to warn myself, to stop the sequence that led to this moment. But of course, time doesn't work that way. And then another thought hit me, one I couldn't ignore. Even if I had seen it coming, could I have stopped it? My mind wrestled with that, circling guilt, shame, and a strange flicker of understanding. People manipulate, people scheme. That was human nature. I had been blindsided, yes, but perhaps the fault wasn't entirely mine. As the flashbacks faded, my gaze returned to the room, to my cousin's smug grin now faltering, to my fiancée's steady, observant eyes. The sting of betrayal still lingered, but now it was tinged with clarity. I was seeing it all, the pattern, the manipulation, the exploitation of my past authority, and I realized I could process it, learn from it, and, most importantly, reclaim my own power in the moment that I couldn't hold it in anymore. The words, the humiliation, the betrayal, they all collided in my chest until they demanded release. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly at my sides, and stepped toward him. The laughter and murmurs around us faded into a dull hum, almost as if the world had narrowed to just the two of us. Why? I said, my voice low at first, almost a whisper, then louder. Why would you do that? Why humiliate me in front of everyone? The tremor in my voice betrayed the storm of emotions I was holding back. Anger, hurt, disbelief. My throat burned. My chest felt tight, and my stomach twisted like I'd been punched. He looked at me, the smugness from earlier flickering and dimming, replaced by something defensive, calculating. It was just a joke, he said, trying to sound casual, though his voice lacked conviction. Relax. Everyone's laughing. You're overreacting. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. A joke? I asked, each word sharper than I intended. A joke is supposed to be funny. What you did, this wasn't funny. It was calculated. You knew exactly what you were doing, and you picked that moment for maximum effect. My fiancée's eyes stayed on me, calm and unwavering, a quiet support in the storm. I felt a flash of gratitude toward her, but it was quickly buried under the anger and humiliation still coursing through me. I remembered the past, the flashbacks of being the judge, the trust one had placed, the pride I had felt. And now it had been twisted, turned into a weapon against me. My chest heaved as I forced the words out, raw and unfiltered. I trusted you. I respected you. And you, I hesitated, my voice catching slightly. You used it against me. The room was tense now. Family members had stopped their conversations, subtle shifts in posture betraying their attention. I could feel all eyes on us, and yet, it didn't matter. None of them could take back what had been done or erase the sting. He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off, my voice rising with emotion I hadn't allowed myself until this moment. You think this is clever, that you're funny, but all you did was show everyone exactly who you are. And me? I see it now too. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. I felt my hands unclench slightly, the tension in my shoulders easing. Just a little, like admitting the pain aloud had given me some control back. I wasn't just a victim in this scene anymore. I was speaking, confronting, reclaiming the narrative. And in that charged moment, I realized something crucial. Anger was exhausting, yes, but it was also clarifying. Every insult, every jab, every calculated smirk was laid bare, and now, finally, I could see him clearly. The room felt heavier after my confrontation. My cousin's words had faded into a tense silence, but the energy didn't lift, it shifted. I could feel it pressing down on me. That mix of scrutiny, curiosity, and judgment. People were watching, some with wide eyes, some with subtle smirks, and some who looked genuinely uncomfortable. I realized, in that moment, how isolated I felt. Even surrounded by the people who were supposed to be family, that I scanned the room, catching the flicker of expressions as they processed what had just happened. My aunt's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting between us like she was trying to figure out which side to take. My uncle leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his jaw tight, perhaps wrestling with disbelief or frustration at the drama unfolding. Some cousins whispered to each other, barely concealing the amusement that felt like salt in an open wound that I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing thoughts. Family is supposed to be a safe place, I thought bitterly. And here I am, under their eyes, feeling smaller than I ever imagined. My heart ached with the sting of betrayal, not just from my cousin, but from the subtle shift of everyone else's attention. How easily their amusement or shock replaced the comfort I had counted on. The smell of the room, spiced dishes, and dessert didn't comfort me this time. Instead, it felt like a backdrop to a scene I didn't want to be in, like the aroma was mocking the tension. I could hear faint murmurs, soft gasps, and the shuffle of feet on the floor, all underscoring my isolation. Even the chandelier above, which had seemed so grand and welcoming earlier, now cast cold shadows that seemed to highlight the gap between me and the rest of the family. I felt my hands fidget again, brushing against my sides, gripping the edge of a chair as if it could ground me. My mind raced. Are they judging me? Do they think I overreacted? Or worse, are they siding with him? Every subtle glance, every twitch of a mouth, every sideways look made me feel exposed. And yet, somewhere in the pit of that discomfort, a quiet awareness began to form. I can't control how they react. I could not make them see my side, could not force anyone to understand the pain of being manipulated in front of everyone. What I could control, what I had to control, was me, my reactions, my dignity, my sense of self in the middle of this storm. I took a slow breath, letting it fill my chest and ease the trembling in my hands. I realized the isolation wasn't just external, it was internal too, the weight of feeling misunderstood, overlooked, and mocked. But acknowledging it, letting myself feel it, made the heaviness bearable. At least now I knew where I stood and what I needed to do next. After everyone's eyes drifted elsewhere, after the murmurs and whispered judgments faded into the background, I found myself alone in the quiet of the house. The laughter, the chatter, the clinking of dishes, all of it seemed distant now, like I was hearing it through water. I sank into a chair near the window, staring out at the darkening evening, trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. The sting of betrayal still burned, sharp and relentless. My chest felt heavy, my throat raw from the words I had spoken, from the confrontation I hadn't realized I was holding back until it finally spilled out. The embarrassment lingered too, like a shadow clinging to me, reminding me that the scene in the dining room would replay in my mind for days, maybe weeks. That I tried to replay it logically, to find the lesson, to understand the patterns I'd missed. My cousin's mockery, his calculated timing, the way he exploited something I'd once held with pride, it all made a strange kind of sense now, though it didn't lessen the hurt. I realized that people manipulate, people scheme, and sometimes you just end up in their crossfire. The silence around me was thick but calming, a contrast to the chaos inside my head. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of cars passing by outside, the occasional creak of the old floorboards settling. Every small sound anchored me, grounding me, reminding me that life was continuing outside this bubble of shame and humiliation. I thought about my fiancée's words, the moment she froze, the authority and clarity in her voice. That brief pause had been like a lifeline, a small but undeniable reminder that I wasn't entirely alone, that someone understood. It was a strange mixture of comfort and pain, realizing the support was subtle but powerful that I let myself feel. It all, the anger, the embarrassment, the sadness, the numbness. There was a strange relief in acknowledging it rather than pushing it down, a quiet acceptance that this was part of my story, part of the reality I had to navigate. I realized that controlling my emotions wasn't about forcing them away. It was about letting them pass through me, like waves washing over rocks, eroding pain into understanding. That I took a deep breath, letting the cool evening air brush against my face as I stared out the window. The room was dim, but the fading light reminded me that darkness is temporary, that clarity follows chaos if you give it time. I knew I needed to forgive, not him, not yet, but myself, for letting it hurt this much, for underestimating the situation, for trusting blindly. And in that quiet, almost meditative moment, I felt the first stirrings of resolve. I couldn't change what had happened, couldn't erase the humiliation, but I could decide how to move forward. I could reclaim the narrative, step out of the shadow of that moment, and carry myself with dignity, no matter what anyone else thought. Morning came slowly, soft light spilling through the blinds and painting the room in stripes of gold and shadow. I sat with a warm cup of tea in my hands, letting the steam rise and curl around my face, grounding me in the quiet of the new day. The events from last night still hovered in my mind, heavy but no longer sharp, like a storm that had passed and left the air crisp and clear. That I thought about my cousin, his smugness, the mockery, the betrayal, and I felt the weight lift slightly. Not because I had forgiven him, not yet, but because I had processed it. I had confronted him, spoken my truth, reclaimed some control over a moment that had tried to define me. And for the first time, I realized that my power had never truly been lost. It had just been obscured by shock and pain. That I looked around the quiet house, the faint smell of lingering spices still in the air, the distant hum of traffic outside. It struck me that life continued regardless of drama, betrayal, or humiliation. The world didn't stop, and neither would I. There was a strange comfort in that, a reminder that I could choose what mattered moving forward, what energy to carry, and what to leave behind. That I thought about my fiancée's words and the strength she had shown, frozen in that brief, clarifying pause. It reminded me that sometimes validation and support come quietly, subtly, but they matter more than 1,000 voices laughing or judging. Her presence in that moment had anchored me, and I knew now that I didn't need to rely on others' approval to hold my dignity. That a slow, small smile tugged at my lips. I could still feel the sting of betrayal, yes, but it was tempered by clarity and resilience. I knew now that boundaries were important, that trust should be given carefully, and that some people, no matter their relationship, might test you in ways you don't expect. And that was okay. I could accept it, learn from it, and grow beyond it. I stood, walking to the window, letting the morning light wash over me. The city outside stirred gently, cars passing, distant voices of neighbors starting their day. I let out a quiet exhale, feeling the tension release from my shoulders, a subtle sense of triumph hidden in the simplicity of surviving, of standing tall despite the chaos. I wasn't naive anymore, but I wasn't bitter either. I had been hurt, humiliated, and forced to confront not just my cousin, but the nuances of trust, family, and self-respect. And yet, here I was, still whole, still aware of my own worth. The path ahead wasn't about revenge or resentment. It was about living fully, choosing wisely, and embracing the lessons without letting them define me. And in that calm, reflective morning, I realized something vital. Pain doesn't last forever, and neither does humiliation. What lasts is what you choose to carry forward: strength, dignity, and the quiet knowledge that you survived it all and will continue to thrive.